Welcome to episode 4 of the Great Kids podcast. My name is Amanda Miller, and I am the director of Great Kids.
And I am Jessica Gervais, training coordinator with Great Kids.
Today we welcome Aaron and Janell Lane, co-founders of Courageous Healing. Welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
So I want to open up our chat today talking a little bit about issues that pertain to mental health in youth. And specifically want to start off with, I'm noticing, and I think people in general are noticing, that mental health situations, occurrences are trending up. What do you believe, especially in light of your backgrounds, and I'll let you get into that a little bit as we go along, what do you believe are the biggest contributing factors to these numbers rising?
So I think there are several things that are attributing to the levels rising, but one of the major factors is social media. One thing that we know is through listening to several professionals speak on the topic is that this generation is the most connected, loneliest generation. And what they're making reference to is, although they're connected through social media and different platforms, and they get to experience engaging with individuals on an instantaneous basis, when the social media goes off, they're lonely. Mm-hmm. They don't have individuals to affirm them. They don't have individuals to speak into their lives, which leaves them in isolation a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And what that does is they live in a world of comparison. Mm-hmm. And this world of comparison causes them to devalue themselves. And we like to associate that with watching highlight reels. Mm-hmm. So they're watching the highlight reels of individuals' lives.
Even as adults, we can get caught in that comparison trap. Mm-hmm. And I just think with youth, you know, especially when you're younger, those problems seem to be huge because your life hasn't opened up quite yet for yourself to like kind of have some perspective on, you know, and some grounded identity for yourself. So I mean, it's a huge thing, I think, with youth, because these problems can seemingly overtake their lives. And it's understandable. It's understandable because at that point, their life is a little smaller than it gets when they get bigger.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we all, like you said, even as adults, we face and we deal with. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of magnified from a youth perspective because they're currently on this journey of who am I? Right. What is it that, where does my value come from? You know, am I loved? Do I fit in? Am I enough? And if you don't have that being spoken into your life from family and and significant friends and things of that nature, then you look for it and you search for it in different places. And social media tends to be that place.
Sure.
I think another aspect of that is emotion regulation. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that that's something that a lot of youth are now struggling with, the ability to just regulate their own emotions. Mm-hmm. And I think some of that comes from adults not always having the ability to regulate their own emotions.
Right.
And so that, coupled with the fact that youth oftentimes don't have the language or the words to express what's happening internally. So then they show it behaviorally. And then we as adults tend to respond to the negative behaviors that we don't want to see with discipline or critique or criticism when they're already struggling internally.
Right.
And so it can be really challenging to regulate your own emotions as an adult, especially in the face of your children acting out behaviorally. But if you don't regulate your own emotions and just keep yourself calm and respond calmly, then you're modeling for them more out of control behavior. So I think that, it's not something that I believe we talk about enough, the ability to just manage and regulate your own emotions and how we can model that for children.
Or even identify our own emotions.
Right. Yes. So like when I was pregnant, I actually ended up having a job working for the courts, and I was developing programming for parents who were working with their children on brain development skills. And so one of the best things you can do for young children is to help actually like label things. Mm-hmm. So everything that you're doing, you just label it. So do you see mommy opening the refrigerator? Do you see the eggs? Do you see the milk? This is a spoon. Do you see me stirring? It helps language develop. Well, I think we need to do the same thing with emotions.
Emotions, sure.
Oh, I see you're really upset right now. Are you frustrated? Are you angry? That's okay. Sometimes it's okay to feel frustrated and angry. And then like parents get so frustrated when their kids are throwing a fit, but there's a difference between fits, like temper tantrums, and meltdowns. Mm-hmm. A temper tantrum is I'm frustrated because I'm not getting what I want. A meltdown is I cannot control or regulate my own emotions. I am out of control right now. And if a kid is having a meltdown and we discipline the meltdown, they're not able to control their own emotions. So then we're
adding
disciplined.
fuel to the fire.
Right,
in that
right.
case.
So just educating ourselves on different things about that, I think, can also then help model those things for children.
And for adults, if I may, for adults, that's emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
That's your ability to recognize and identify your emotions and then manage those emotions. Because what we know from a youth perspective is that when it comes to youth, more is often caught than taught. Right. So from a parenting perspective, you have to be careful. You can tell a child not to do certain things or not to behave in a certain manner, but if they see you doing it, they're going to pay attention to what you're doing, not what you're saying.
Absolutely. Oh gosh. Yes. I know that.
Literally, I read an article once and it talked about imagine being really frustrated with your phone, like your cell phone. Have you ever gotten so frustrated you want to throw your cell phone?
A few times.
Yes. So that's a very common experience, but then you don't even have the language to say exactly why it's so frustrating, but you literally want to throw your phone. Well, young people or kids are experiencing the same thing, but they don't have the words and the language, so they throw a temper tantrum. So it's the same level of frustration or anger, and they don't have the words to say what they're feeling, let alone the ability to calm themselves down.
Right.
So helping them develop the language and the skills to calm themselves is key.
Yeah. Sure. So kind of going back to the topic of mental health, we know that according to the CDC, that death by suicide is the second leading cause of death now here in the U.S. Do you guys have any insight as to why we're seeing such a rise, especially in that age group? I think it's 10 to 34, right? In this really young age group, we're seeing this rise in, these young people taking their lives at such, an early age. What are some of the causes for that, in your opinion?
Well, I think that for a long time we've been afraid to talk about suicide. We even when you approach someone to ask questions about if they are suicidal, just asking, "Are you suicidal?
Yeah.
Are you thinking about killing yourself?" We say it in roundabout ways. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? And those are different things. Someone may be cutting and not necessarily mean to kill themselves.
Right.
So we have to just get comfortable talking about it because we have to give language to what it is. It normalizes things and it makes it easier to discuss what's really going on.
Just like emotions.
When
we're naming emotions for our children.
And that in itself is affirming. Giving language to something that you're experiencing helps affirm the experience. So if you're feeling something, you don't know how to put it into words and you're wondering if you're crazy or what is it? And someone says, "Oh, are you really anxious?" And you're like, "Anxious? Anxiety, is that what it is?" That is what it is. It's a real thing. I'm not crazy. So it helps to normalize it, and then just that feels supportive and
Does it
warming.
help to own it in some way as well?
It does.
That you can name it?
And at the end of the day, if someone is experiencing thoughts or feelings of suicide, don't you want them to feel comfortable talking about it? And if we're not even comfortable enough to ask them about it, what's the likelihood they're going to be comfortable talking
Opening
about
up.
it? Yeah. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing is we're seeing increases in the rate of suicide, even with pastors and leaders of organizations. And it's just normed across the board. So in youth populations, I wouldn't expect it to be any different.
Sure.
Almost I would expect it to be higher because they don't have the language to express and because it usually shows up in very action-oriented ways. Sure. But even with that, people have criticized some of the local pastors and said how can they do this? They know the word and they know they have all these people that they're responsible for. But when you're in that amount of pain, you can't critique someone and say they should or shouldn't do something. So I kind of have been talking about it from the standpoint of a migraine. If you've ever had a really bad migraine, I get migraines regularly, and I am a incredibly sensitive, attentive parent. I love my kids. I'm very engaged. I would do anything for my kids. They come first all the time. But when I have a migraine, I don't even know where they are. Yeah. I literally don't. I don't even care. Where you go with your dad. Yeah. For now. I can't focus on that because my head is hurting so bad that I literally have to be in the dark, door closed, no sounds. And like, that's how bad the pain gets. And when if you've ever had chronic pain or migraines, you know that pain gets so intense sometimes that you would do anything to stop it.
Absolutely.
Like even medication. If we get, we take medicine from the doctor, we don't know what's in the medicine. We just trust this health professional to give it to us unless it's something for mental health. And then we're like, I don't know. I don't want to take that. So it's all this stigma associated with different medications. But at the end of the day, when the pain gets so intense, you're no longer worried about those things. You're doing whatever you can to get rid of the pain.
Absolutely.
And so from a suicide perspective, emotional pain is the same way. Sometimes that pain gets so intense that you would do anything to just stop the pain. And you're not always thinking clearly and logically, like, if I do this, this is forever.
Right.
You're just thinking of it as an immediate solution. And I think we have to be able to normalize it in that way. And suicidal thoughts show up in different ways. They're not always, I want to kill myself. Sometimes it's questions like, would it be easier if I weren't here? Who would notice if I weren't here? Maybe if I weren't here, everything would just be better.
Would make it easier for everyone.
Yeah,
Right.
So we have to just be able to start like normalizing these things and having more regular conversations about it so that we can call it what it is. Because most people, I won't say everyone, but a lot of people have those thoughts show up in different ways. They may reject them or not feed into it, is what a lot of people say. But it's a normal part of processes. As humans, it happens. Even from a biblical perspective, people in the Bible had suicidal thoughts, so we have to just start having those conversations and normalize things.
Absolutely.
And we have to stop. I mean, one thing is you have to think, what does suicide look like? Or what is someone who's, I should say, what is someone who's thinking about suicide look like? Most people think it's someone who's depressed or someone who is angry and dark, when suicide today looks like walking around with a smile, right? So I think people are looking for certain things in order to identify
that's what we
it.
see on the commercials, right?
Yeah.
The people laying in bed and,
And that's not the case. They're the people that's walking around helping people every day, that are smiling, that are, happy-go-lucky, talking to people.
If only it were that easy to identify, right?
Yeah, and that's what modern day depression looks like. That's what suicidal thoughts looks like. That's what anxiety looks like. We've learned the art of looking like we're okay when we're not okay. Yeah. And so I think just the more we normalize being able to talk about times where we're not okay, being able to ask people, how are you doing, and not expecting them to just say, great. Like being able to sit in it if their answer is not great today. Right. And ask more questions to dig deeper instead of just expecting that surface level response so we can get on with our day.
Fine. I'm fine.
Yeah. That's what I want you to say, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm a parent. Jessica's a parent. I know the two of you are parents. As parents, I think any conversation you can approach about youth, it's natural to reflect it back upon yourself and question what you could be doing better or differently with your children. And along those lines, what are we looking for with our kids? And how do we create these environments that are emotionally supportive for them if they are struggling?
I think the biggest thing is to see them. I mean, you really have to see them because I think we're so busy as parents. There are so many responsibilities, from working to going to the grocery store to cooking, all these things that the day goes by fast, right? And in the midst of that, you have your children who are in need of things, and a lot of times it's on the back end of what we're trying to get done or accomplish for the day. So we kind of just push it to the side, but we have to really take time and see them because you will get the I'm okay, I'm fine.
Yeah, especially as my kids are approaching adolescence, and I'm more and more concerned about making sure we have, because I've heard time and time again that communication starts to break down as they enter those years, and I'm trying to put a lot of emphasis on, you can talk to me about anything, and let's, keep this bond and this open line going back and forth. I'm not saying you have to share everything with me, but, there's nothing I wouldn't help you through. And so it was easier when they were younger, to tell where they were emotionally and mentally. And it's going to start getting harder.
And if we think about it and we circle it back to the social media end of things, the one reason why social media and even gaming nowadays, the reason why it's so prevalent is because of the instant gratification.
You're right.
They're getting affirmed, they're getting likes, they're getting that validation right now. So as parents, if we're not affirming and validating right now in the moment when they're looking for it, they'll seek it somewhere else where they can get the attention and the time that they need right now.
Well, and I think another thing that goes along with the social media is it's an escape.
Yes.
Just like movies. Like for some people, they love watching movies. It's that 1 hour, 2 hours where you don't have to think about or feel anything that you're experiencing. And so I think the more that kids are on social media, any form of technology, and learning to escape anytime things get hard, that sets kids up for addiction and all kinds of other ways of escaping and not being able to sit in and tolerate their emotions. And so I think we've got to intentionally start to retrain what it feels like to be able to sit in an emotion, even when it's really intense, until it passes, knowing that it will pass.
Right.
And we can talk it through and we can use coping skills and things like that, but we don't have to escape it.
Right. Which I guess probably starts with us, right? Because again, I even think about as an adult, there are times where I would prefer to escape it
To
versus
not think about it. Yeah.
Really submerge myself in it. So something I suppose we could all practice probably a little bit more regularly.
Easy to get there.
Yeah. So switching gears here just a little bit, still on the topic of mental health, right? But can we talk more specifically about minority populations? I know in some of the conversations that Amanda and I have been able to have with you, you've talked a little bit about certain considerations, maybe especially as providers, that need to be in place to be able to effectively work with minority populations who are struggling with mental health or perhaps suicidal thoughts, et cetera.
Yes. So I think one thing that stands out the most to me is, as a therapist, as a licensed mental health counselor, there's several, not just in Fort Wayne, but nationally, people have been speaking about mental health in minority populations for years, trying to decrease that stigma. Just like every other population, there's stigma with mental health across the board. But that stigma kind of increases when you look at specifically minority populations that traditionally have a history of being strong and not sharing your business and just all these different things that we've been set up to feel, and it's been passed down from generation to generation. It's so embedded and ingrained that it requires intentional work to start to decrease some of those internal beliefs about getting help. Right. And being able to just be honest about times where you're struggling or you don't have it all together. And so that work has been taking place for years now on a national basis. Like, lots of people have been starting to normalize talking about mental health and mental health concerns. The thing that saddens me is we now have a population of people who are starting to be okay with not being okay, and now seeking support and seeking help. But we, as an industry, aren't yet equipped to provide the services that are necessary and needed. We have mental health services, we have cultural training, but we can't always yet provide the services in ways that feel authentic to the population. So we get is people now reporting, but then high dropout or no-show rates for minority clients. And then we wonder if it's something about this population that's causing it, when really it's not necessarily the population, it's that the population isn't getting services the way that they need to be served. And they might not even be comfortable enough with white therapists to vocalize it honestly, because then they go to therapists of color and they're very vocal about the things that didn't work well, the times they didn't feel comfortable, the things they needed that they didn't receive. And I know from having coworkers, I've been one of few therapists of color in most of the places and settings that I've worked. And I know from talking to my white coworkers, some white therapists don't feel that their schooling equipped them to deal with some of the things that, they're seeing in minority populations. And they don't even feel comfortable saying that out loud. Because what happens when you say it out loud? Does it mean that you're not culturally aware or sensitive? Does it mean that you're not, are you racist? Does it mean that you are judging a whole entire group of people? When really, no, we just need to start normalizing these conversations so that we can talk about it. We have to create the type of environments where we can have honest dialogue. So even from a training perspective, you can't train someone on something that you think they don't need. And if we have a very basic cultural competency training, and we check the box, we think we got that covered. And just about anybody that you ask, you say, do you need diversity training? Nobody's going, yeah, I need, yes, I do. I'm not quite aware enough in this area. I'm a little racist over here. Nobody feels that way.
Right.
But we all always need diversity training.
Right.
No matter where you are across the board, we could always grow. And it requires that we start having real, transparent, honest conversations instead of checkbox conversations. And so when we look at this population, one thing we know to be true is there are high incidences of toxic stress. Not that there's anything wrong with minority populations, but there's oftentimes there's higher correlation between minority populations and living in underserved areas because of redlining, because of a history in this country, because of lots of different things that set them up to be predisposed to living in toxic stress. And toxic stress referring to this trauma after trauma or issue after issue that they're having to navigate, which kicks on that fight or flight response. And so you have a population that's living in fight or flight or having cortisol that's pumping throughout your body all the time, which is great if you're in the woods and you see a bear and you need to run or fight, but it's not so great when you're sitting on the couch at home. And so we've got to get the body to catch up to the fact that the trauma and the past events are past and not still present. And if they are still present, continuing to happen over and over, there's a side over here that has to be done to work on the systemic issues that keep creating these conditions. And then there's a side over here that have to help people cope with them real time, but also heal from them once it's no longer needed.
Sure.
So I know that's pretty
there, but no. I mean, it's a big question. Requires a big answer.
So what's interesting is I'm in the final semesters of a master's in social work. I'll be done this summer. And in one of my courses, one of my white counterparts was talking about how it's the responsibility of white therapists to do the work in order to learn about populations of color, in order to better relate to the populations. It's not on the client to come in and educate you. You should be doing the work so that when the client comes in, you're prepared, as well as you still need to learn and allow the client to be the expert on their own lives. But it does take some responsibility of a therapist who may not be familiar with culture, may not be familiar with other minority groups, to do some work to educate themselves on different things within certain cultures.
So along those lines, I'm going to ask you, and I realize this is, the answer to this could go on and on because it's really a lot of things that could be put in place. But do you have any practical tips or applications that can be put into place when dealing with mental health for populations of color?
So in incidences where it's like a cross-cultural interaction where there's a white therapist and a client of color.
Right.
I would just suggest going into that situation and talking about race and cultural differences. Like a lot of times we want to just say, I don't see color. I don't see color.
Right.
But when working with populations of color, you must see color. It's a part of their identity and who they are, and you strip them of that identity if you refuse to see it. And so the more, if you can just come in and say, I know there's a cultural difference here, and if there are ever, if there's ever anything I say that is out of line or that's a misstep, by all means, you can correct me. And if I ever don't understand something, I will ask. And just say, we can talk about it in here. You can, if there are times where you face anything out in the world or in the community that is hard for you and it deals with somebody that's white, that's okay. We can talk about that in here. Just creating this rapport very directly, very upfront. I have found in my experience being completely transparent and direct from the beginning works well cross-culturally.
Gosh, I just feel like if more people could have more transparent, direct conversations about
it takes the sting out of it.
Admitting what you don't know.
Yeah. But you set a tone where if they start feeling uncomfortable, the likelihood that they'll talk to you about it instead of just not come back to the next session, it increases. And for me, I tend to be the favorite therapist of middle-aged white female clients. Because I am transparent, I'm direct, and I'm honest. And when they first come in, they're like, I don't know if you can help
She's
me.
a lot.
You might not be able to help me, you know.
Yeah.
But then after it doesn't take me a long time to build rapport because I'm going to bring my whole self to the sessions, because doing therapy with minority populations and clients requires that. So when I went to school and I was educated, you know, basic therapy training 101, the session isn't about you. So you don't take up time making the session about you. It's about the client. And so you leave as much of yourself out of it as possible. But when I work with this population, I must be fully present. They have to know me if they're going to open up and share anything about themselves. And so I have to bring my full self. Now, I don't take over the session and talk about my own stuff, but I tell them enough about me right up front that they feel comfortable like they know me. And that's necessary. And so I would encourage white therapists in working with clients of color to be more transparent about who you are, your beliefs, where you stand, and just put it out there. Hey, this is something that I struggle with. I don't know a lot about this area. I don't expect you to teach me, but if something comes up, I want you to know that I don't know as much about this area, you know? And so it levels out that playing field.
Amanda and I talk about this sometimes in the asset training. It reminds me of the conversation we have when specifically we're talking about race and culture with youth. And it's always encouraging for us to hear, especially when we go into schools and just different youth serving organizations, that it sounds like they do so much more now in terms of celebrating and recognizing different cultures, where I think like when I was growing up, it was like you said, we were kind of taught more of like, we don't see color like and I mean, it was with good intention, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all equal, we're all human, we're all the same, we all bleed red, you know, right? But I think, you know, the downside to that was that now for probably, you know, people my age who are out now doing therapy is that that's so ingrained that, well, I'm not going to treat you any differently because I see you as an equal, and they don't realize that that's really not the most effective way to interact or connect with that person because they feel disregarded almost.
Well, I think it comes down to a little bit more than just seeing the color. It's appreciating the color. It's appreciating the differences, right? It's the things that make you unique as an individual, as a culture, as a person that we see, but now we also value and appreciate it. It goes along with talking about diversity versus inclusion, right? Diversity is things that, you know, the color of our skin that make us a group or an individual. So diversity is you allowing me to come to the party, right? Inclusion is you asking me to dance. So that's you inviting me into your space to be a part of what you have going on.
That's a really good analogy.
So I think, so I think it's a matter of we've all grown up with let's treat each other equal, right? We're all in one likeness. Which is great. That's how we should think and that's how we should believe. But we have to appreciate and value the difference of every individual person, even within our own cultures.
Right.
Because
no one's path is exactly the same. Yeah.
Another thing that I would suggest is anything that can be done to make the therapeutic experience not feel like it's part of a system is helpful with minority populations. So not everybody, and I hate like blanketing minority populations as a whole, but when there are specific groups and specific individuals, if the therapy feels like a system and the person doesn't feel like an individual with dignity that's valued and remembered, that's the key, remembered, the likelihood that they'll come back is very low. Because at the end of the day, what type of interactions have they had with systems?
Probably very surface level.
If someone shows up at their door with a clipboard, is that a positive or a negative?
Yeah, that's very negative.
And are they a number or a person?
And historically, how have systems been set up to go against, if you will, minority populations? So anything from a system perspective, you just have to be cautious to make individuals feel like, okay, is this to benefit me? Or is this to take advantage of me in some way or put me in jeopardy of something?
So Mitch Landrieu, who was the former mayor of New Orleans, he has an organization now, and it's called Out of Many One, but it's the term that means that. And it focuses on systemic racism and systemic cultural issues. And so he did a study of 800 different people all across the U.S., different communities, different age groups, across the board. He wanted it to be very inclusive and to just look at how we look at racism. And so what he found was when white people talk about racism, it means an act of malice or malice within a person or individual, the way they look at people that are different than them, that individual, where almost all populations of color said is systemic in nature. It's the way systems in our country have been set up foundationally to oppress. And so there's two different views of racism. So when we're having these differences or confrontations around racism, those thoughts and comments like, are you making this about race? Really? Does racism still exist really? Slavery was so long ago. The institution of slavery was, but not the thoughts, beliefs, and feelings that undergirded it. It's the same thoughts and feelings and beliefs that contribute to police action shootings and people not like seeing it, but not feeling it because it doesn't connect or relate. You know, and so there's so many things that are systemic that we have to look at, that services like healthcare and mental health have some of those things embedded in them. I did a focus group of moms of color, and they were just talking about their experience throughout the birthing process and why they don't come back for their follow-up appointments post-pregnancy. You know, there's high rates of infant mortality and things like that, and that's babies living past their first birthday. And it's African-American babies specifically are dying more in Fort Wayne specifically than they are in some third world countries. And so when we look at those, we're trying to figure out the reasons underlying it and why. And one of the things that came out that was kind of surprising was a lot of moms felt like they were being talked down to, or they weren't being heard or listened to because of the kind of insurance they were assumed to have.
Right.
They either had Medicaid, or even if they had private insurance, there was an assumption that they had Medicaid. And so therefore they were treated poorly or talked down to. And so that's surprising, but that's embedded.
It's systemic.
It's systemic. And that baby is growing up having had that type of birth experience where the mom wasn't valued during time of delivery. And what we know to be true about cortisol is if your baby's baked in cortisol, your baby is born predisposed to anxiety and stress. And so it's all so connected and related. It's just good to know and keep in mind as you're working with populations that face more systemic barriers and toxic stress.
Sure. Okay, so we're running out of time for this podcast, and we've covered a lot of information in a fairly short amount of time. But before we end this conversation today, are there any resources or recommendations that you'd like to give to those who are listening, whether it's on the topic of youth mental health, suicide, working with minority populations? Are there any websites, books, tips that you can give for somebody who would like to learn a little bit more about some of the things we've talked about today?
First off, as mentioned, Janell and I are co-founders of our own company, Courageous Healing, which is a mental health organization that specializes in minority mental health. So if you desire to learn more about us, learn more about the services that we offer, you can find us at our website of www.courageoushealing.org. And you'll be able to go and see what services we provide.
Or even if you have any questions that you kind of want to talk through, we're very approachable. We're open to talk to, let us know. We're passionate about this. It's not just about us and our organization. We're passionate about pushing this agenda of minority mental health that really, really meets the needs emotionally of the population. It feels like what they need. It's authentic to what they need. Not just, blanket mental health. We want it to fit everybody, but there are some specific needs. And so we're willing to help support. We want to see more therapists of color. We want to see more culturally trained white therapists, and not just culturally trained as it pertains to I had this training, but that feel like they have training that equips them. So when they go into these interactions, they go in with confidence and they know how to talk about this stuff. So we're willing to support and help in any way that we can. There's some other resources I like to, kind of share from an individual basis.
Please.
So there's a book called Courageous Conversations on Race. The author is Curtis Linton. That's really good. It talks about some of the systemic stuff, and it talks about working with groups and populations of people. So that's really helpful. And then I'm currently reading a book called White Awake. I love it. And then there's another book that's called White Fragility. That's my next to read, but a lot of my friends are talking about these issues and working through them. So yeah, I would just say if there's any ways that we can support, we're available and more than willing to do so.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It is time for us to wrap up. We appreciate the Lane's time as well as your time. Thank you again for joining us for this and other podcasts. Please visit our website, www.greatkidsallencounty.org. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you.